All right, so hey there, everybody. Welcome to the latest of our series of free webinars presented by NWC Webinars. My name is Andrew King. I'm the editor of Canadian Musician Magazine. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce our presenter for the session. It's Jim Norris, the publisher of Canadian Musician, the president of parent company Norris-Whitney Communications, and show me the money. That's what you've registered for. We're going to help you find and apply for funding for your musical project, your company, or your organization through a number of different streams we'll get to momentarily. To start us off here, just a few housekeeping notes to go over. First, I'm going to launch a poll here, and you'll be able to respond. It'll pop up on your screen momentarily. We're just looking to gauge in which capacity you are involved in the music industry or entertainment industry. And that will essentially help us kind of steer the content this evening and also inform future sessions to bring you. So we'll jump on that and give everyone a moment to select their response and see who we've got with us. A few other things to note. Yeah, it looks like we've got about half recording and performing artists. Share those in a minute. There's going to be two question periods throughout. About halfway through the presentation, we'll stop and take a few questions. We'll give priority to those that are pertinent to a topic that we've touched on already or that builds off of something that Jim said. If we don't get to your question at that point, fret not, because at the end of the session, we'll have a longer period to go through any questions, any concerns that you've got. So stick with us for that. You can ask questions. There should be a little window on your interface there, and those will come to me. Also at the end, about a day, 24 hours after the session ends, you'll get an email with a link to the recording. If you want to revisit the session or share it with anybody, you'll be able to do so. And we're also going to share a few titles, some further reading titles that are available through our friends at musicbooksplus.com, essentially things that build off of what Jim has spoken about this evening. And at that site, actually, you'll also be able to get some tips to maximize your next webinar experience. So we've had a majority of folks voted in the poll here. I'm going to close that, and yeah, we'll share just so everyone can see the little over half of the folks here are performing and recording artists, small percentage of behind the scenes songwriters, number of professionals, and yeah, that's about akin to the balance we've normally been getting. So here, let's jump into the session. So show me the money. Get funding for your music company or organization. My name, as I mentioned, is Andrew King. I'm the editor of Canadian Musician, as well as Norris-Whitney's other titles, Canadian Music Trade, Professional Lighting and Production, and Professional Sound. A little bit about me here, and the MC for our series. So without further ado here, I'm going to introduce my employer, colleague, my friend, Jim Norris, the president of Norris-Whitney, publisher of Canadian Musician. Jim, thanks for joining us, and yeah, give the floor to you.
Great, thank you, Andrew. So I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening. This webinar is actually based on a seminar that we did at Imsta Festa in Toronto not too long ago and had a great response. So obviously lots of people out there want money. So one, wouldn't even call it a caution, but one thing to recognize that if you're looking for money for any kind of project, it's not going to be easy. It never is, and don't get discouraged. You have to work your way through, especially if it's government related. That kind of puts you through the hoops, and in many cases too, it may take longer than you think, so you have to allow some time. Again, especially government sometimes can take a long time before you actually see any money. And the important thing is don't even start applying for money or looking for grants or loans or anything else until you're ready. So we'll just talk about a few things that'll make you ready. Okay, so number one thing is the strength of your product. Now that product could be a service, could be something that's not necessarily a tangible product, could be your music, it could be your business, but that's important that it's something strong that has traction. Secondly is your experience at doing whatever it is you're trying to get money for. So as a musician or in the industry, whatever it is you do. You also need an effective plan. We're going to talk later about a business plan, but you need to spend some time on that, because anybody who's going to give you money is going to want to see what your plan is. You also, part of your presentation should also be a competent team, so people are going to work with you. Evidence of support, and what we mean there is possibly past sales. So if you've had sales of CDs or online, iTunes, or any of those type of things. Also, social media traction is an important evidence nowadays. It could be publicity that you've had. So if you've got a track record of that, or live performances, but there should be some evidence that somebody out there likes whatever it is you're doing. And then last but not least is profit potential. So you have to demonstrate that whatever it is you're going to do has the potential to actually make some money. So different types of funding. There's quite a few different areas. Loans, where you're borrowing money and obviously you have to pay it back. Grants, which in most cases you don't have to pay back. There's some exceptions there, but generally you don't. Partnerships, where you're involved with other people. Advances, there's certain organizations that will advance you money based on the potential of whatever it is you're doing. Sponsorships, crowdfunding we'll get into, and then there's another category for a couple of other things. So as far as loans go, now obviously with a loan you've got to pay it back. Personal here means money that you may have money that you can put into a project. So if you have a company, let's say, and it's a limited company, possibly you can put your own money in as a shareholder's advance, assuming you have cash. You can get money from friends. Now, if you do that, you want to treat that just as if you're dealing with a bank. So you want to have a real agreement, preferably written, so everybody knows what the deal is, how much money they're putting in, how they expect to get a return, how long it's going to take. Financial institutions, such as our friendly bankers, trust companies, credit unions, insurance companies. Now, they're generally speaking, without collateral, you're going to be hard pressed to get much money from a bank, but who knows, right? There are friendly bankers out there. Credit cards can work, but again, there your interest rates are going to be very high, so you've got to have a plan how you're going to get out of that and into something where there's a lower interest rate. Private investors, a lot of times they call them angels, but there's a lot of people out there that would be interested in investing in an entertainment project like a record company or a band. And then there's a number of places online now where you can also borrow money. You can Google that. You'll see there's quite a few of them. So you can go in, put in your information. It's going to run a credit check, and then it will come up with certain amounts of money. Now there you have to be careful of the interest rate, what the repayment program is, but it is another option. So grants, here's certainly not every one that exists, but here's a few. And in the resources page that you can download, it's a PDF. All the links are in there, so you'll be able to follow that, click on it, and go to these various grant sites. Now, one good piece of news is that with the election of the Liberal government a few months ago, and our friend Justin Trudeau, they were big and are big supporters of the arts in Canada. So the amount of money going into the arts has gone up by several $billion over the next few years. So that means that a lot of that money trickles down through these organizations, because a lot of them get their money from the federal government. So it's very good news. And Canada is the most generous country in the world in supporting the arts. A lot of other countries, it's virtually very little. United States, there's very little funding for the arts. Canada's a lot, and now there's even more because of the funds that the federal government has committed. So Canada Music Fund is a federal organization, and what you have to do with all of these is go to their website, go through it. It's going to tell you what kind of people are eligible, what their next deadlines are and what the process is. So Canada Music Fund, as I said, it's a federal organization. Canada Council for the Arts tends to fund more serious music a lot of times. SOCAN Foundation tends to lean towards songwriters, which kind of makes sense. Factorie's probably the one you've heard the most. And they have a lot of different programs, but they tend to advance money to make records and also for live touring as well. And Factor definitely expects your projects to be profitable. Radio Star Maker Fund is funded by the radio stations and the federal government. MuchFact was called VideoFact before, and now it funds videos and also digital projects and online projects. All of the different provinces have arts councils, like in Ontario, it's the Ontario Arts Council, but BC Arts Council. So you need to have a look through those because all of them have money that they get from the province and also from the federal government. And the music industry associations, most cases are funded by the provinces and the federal government, and you can certainly get information from them. A lot of them are certainly worth joining in the province that you're in, but they have seminars themselves sometimes on these different subjects. So possible partnerships. So if you have a business, one of the partnerships you might have would be customers. So if you're starting, let's say you're starting a recording studio or a record company, you could convince your customers, if you had a lot of credibility, to advance you money. So if you gave them a discount or some other incentive, they might prepay for the services or the products that you make. That's fairly common. Suppliers, so if you have to buy products or services, again, you can negotiate better terms. So a lot of times standard terms are 30 days, but with some, if they really want your business, you can negotiate terms of 60, 90 days or even longer. If you get to a certain size, you can go public. Now that requires a lot of red tape, a lot of reporting, and unless you're trying to raise millions, that's something to wait. If you're in a band, of course, you can have the various members in the band contribute to the project. Again, you want to make sure that there's an agreement so that everybody knows what they're putting in, what their risks are, and what they choose to get back. Very common in a lot of cases for managers. So if you have a manager or looking for one, it's not uncommon for them to put in cash into an artist, or even just to waive their commissions for some period of time while the band is or the artist is getting up and running. There's also private investors who could become a partner or buy shares. And again, that all has to be really, really clear. If you have a company, it's not uncommon to give the staff the benefit of buying shares in the company. Bill Gates did that at Microsoft. All of his original staff invested in Microsoft, and his receptionist was a multimillionaire because obviously they did very well. But a lot of times that could be a real benefit for a staff because then they have a vested interest in the success of your company. So advances, if you're signed with a label, especially a larger label, a lot of times they will advance money for recording and for tour support, videos, various different things, and it's going to depend on their confidence in the future money-making potential of your project. Publishing companies do that as well. Larger publishing companies, again, will advance money based on, again, potential future earnings. So can the Performing Arts Collections Society does that as well. So if they see that, you know, over the next few months you've got a lot of royalties that you're going to receive, they will sometimes advance money to help in your career. So sponsorships, various kinds. And one thing to keep in mind with sponsorships, they don't have to be huge. They don't have to be multi-million-dollar sponsorships necessarily. There's a lot of smaller organizations that will do sponsorships as well. So corporate, obviously, companies from smaller companies up to very large Labatt's, Molson's, etc. Government, a lot of times, especially if you're running an event. If you have a look at Canadian Music Week as an example, cmw.net, that's kind of an idea of how many sponsorships that an organization can get. Media sponsorships, we do a lot of those. We don't usually give cash, but we'll certainly sponsor events and contests, and that will be promotion. And then endorsements. So if you're a musician, companies like Fender and Gibson and these people will do endorsements, and they will provide product in some cases, or they'll provide promotional benefits as well, where they're advertising the fact that you're a Fender endorser. So that can have a lot of value, even though it may not be cash. Crowdfunding. So crowdfunding organizations, such as the ones listed here, give you a platform where you can go in, set up a profile, put in all your information as to what you're looking for, decide how much you're looking for, and then in most cases, like with Kickstarter as an example, usually people there expect something in return. So it could be something like they might get the first copy of your CD, or they might win a house party or something. So there's usually an incentive there. But on Kickstarter, there's a lot of really crazy stuff that I've seen funded. So there was one gentleman on there I saw one time that wanted to become a lady, and he was looking for, I think, $30,000 or something, and he got that in about 2 days. So it's not only music that's on these sites; it's all kinds of different companies and inventions. So these links are and the thing to do is go on there. Kickstarter, as an example, has a lot of music projects. So does Indiegogo. So go on there, do a search by a keyword, and see what other people are doing. And with all of these things, so don't do it till you're ready, because a lot of this is your brand, and you want to make sure you've got your act together before you get yourself out there. Another one's contests. We were involved with Searchlight, CBC contests. So there, it was a lot of hardware from Yamaha and a whole bunch of different, Desiree Dawson, who won that, has a whole whack of different benefits from the industry. We're also sponsoring the Canadian Songwriting Competition right now. You can Google that. And there's, I think, $10,000 worth of cash involved and various other prizes. So that's, if you think you can win a contest, then that's another way to get some cash. Scholarships are another option. A lot of schools and universities and colleges and that will give scholarships. So, that will enable you to take courses and get part of your education paid for.
Okay, and
so questions at this point?
Yeah, that's partway through. Thanks, Jim. I've got a few in the queue here that we'll get to momentarily, but feel free to fire off anything now. Like I say, we will have a longer question period at the end of the session as well if we don't get to what you've sent. And Jim mentioned it partway through there, but in the handout section, you'll notice there are a few resources there for you to grab at your convenience. Among them, just to touch on very quickly, there's the resource page that Jim mentioned that's got hot links, easily one click, and they'll take you to the site of a number of the funding bodies that we had already discussed. You'll also get a notepad style breakdown of the slides from this presentation, so you can jot some notes down. As well in there's a piece that our friend Chris Taylor of Taylor Klein Obala, one of the top entertainment law firms in the country, he did an article for Canadian Musician very much on this subject, essentially talking about a few of the elite and national funding bodies with some tips on how their criteria works, who's eligible for funding, what's expected of the applicant in return, etc. And lastly, Norris-Whitney Communications, our corporate profile is there just to give you an idea of the various services and industries that we're involved in, the magazines we publish, and just give you an overview of the company that's been bringing you the webinar series. So you can consult those at your convenience. Jim, some questions for you. This one's pretty specific, but a good one. Do you know if there's any funding available specific to transportation for tours? The person asking is an entertainment tour coach company in Canada and would love to be able to direct some potential clients to sources of funding for transport.
Well, one of the things that the record companies do is tour support. So that's, that would include that type of thing. So if you did have a deal with a record company and you were given tour support, that could go for transportation. It could go for, if you needed gear or accommodations, food, getting coupons for Kentucky Fried Chicken or whatever it might be. So that's one place, and I believe as well with Factor that they would probably fund that kind of thing as well. So the other thing to keep in mind with some of these organizations, when you go on the website and you see what they do, in some cases, like I've seen Factor fund other things that aren't really mentioned on their website. So don't be afraid to fire them off an email and say, what about this? Is this something that you would fund? Or in some cases, they might be able to mention some other way. The other thing, that if it's transportation, you could certainly contact somebody like Budget Rent a Truck, and there's a sponsorship, right? You could do a deal with them to do a sponsorship, or even one of the Ford or Dodge or one of the car companies, possibly, if they are excited enough about what you're doing, they may do that type of sponsorship where they give you the use of a vehicle for 6 months. So with some of these things, you just have to use your imagination a bit.
Mm-hmm. If I can add to that, Heidi, I know that some of the provincial music industry associations, speaking specifically to Music PEI in this case, although I know their program is based on that of other provinces, but they have some grant packages that can't be used for recordings, but rather are entirely for either tour support or promotion. So that's somewhere that you can direct your clients, is that, or potential clients, is that in a lot of cases there are funding opportunities where it solely is to help get an artist into new markets. And that can include all types of things, including transportation. So I guess something just to keep in your back pocket. Jim, one of our attendees is with the Manitoba Registered Music Teachers Association. They're celebrating the centennial in 2019. Any ideas as to potential funding opportunities that they might be able to take advantage of?
A lot of the different grants that we mentioned will fund events. A lot of them are very event focused. So I know for sure the Ontario Music Fund will do that type of thing, and I'd have to say that the one in your province might as well. So the three things they seem to favor are artists, record companies, and events. So, and then the other way for events too is sponsorship. You have to put together a good package for potential sponsors with the benefits of being a sponsor, and most events can get sponsorship for sure. And if it's for teachers, obviously that's a lucrative market for a lot of SOCAN is pretty good with doing things like that. Some of the musical instrument companies would probably be interested. So there's probably, and then also the city where it's being held. Some cases, city government will sponsor events. The province, federal government. So there's, for any kind of event, there's a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Leanne mentions that they'll be hosting a national conference that year. Yeah, congratulations, I guess, on the upcoming centennial. There's some ideas there. We've got a few questions here pertaining to the business plan and funding applications, and we're going to be touching on that in the second half here. So I'll save those and just keep them in the queue. If Jim doesn't touch on what folks are asking, we can jump to that in the next round. But yeah, let's move forward here. Yeah, Jim, business plan.
Okay, so one thing you're going to have to put together is a business plan, and this is kind of a typical summary of what's in a business plan. So the executive summary sounds very fancy, but basically it's just a page or two that's an overview of what the entire business plan is about. Now, even if you're not applying for money, you should have a business plan anyway, and successful companies do one every year. And the key there is do the plan, but also some people do a plan and they never look at it again. So you want to look at it and refer to it. Takes a bit of work. In there should also be the products and or services that you're going to be using the money for, your sales and marketing, and that could actually even be a separate plan, but that should certainly be part of it. How you're going to generate revenue and how you're going to promote yourself. Operations, so the logistics and the organization of what it is you're doing, and that could be the next thing is your management team. So who's involved? So in a band, that could be the leader of the band as an example, and if you have a manager, a road manager, those types of things, the booking agent, if you've got somebody you're working with regularly. And then the development of all of this, how's that going to happen? How are you going to develop the business? And it depends where you're at. Like it might be a business that you're about to launch, or it could be one that's been around for a while. So again, at this time of year, being November, excellent time to be looking at a plan for 2017. So that would be, what's going to happen in 2017. And then the fun part, of course, is the financial summary. So you got to whip out your copy of Excel there, and you need to have, if it's a business that's already operating, then you can put in your profit and loss statement and your balance sheet. But if it's something that hasn't happened yet, then you need to do projections. So best guesses, and usually it's good to do three. One kind of the middle ground, one worst case, and one best case is usually. Now, they're a lot of work, and most people recognize that they're not totally accurate, but it gives them some idea where it's going to go. And of course, in that should be, like in your best case, that should assume that you got the money that you were after and what you were going to do with it and what effect it had on the outcome of your finances. Now, one thing, just talking about the business plan again, I discovered a really good online site called liveplan.com, and the URL for that's in the resources thing. And it's a cloud-based one, so there's no software to install. Very inexpensive. It's $19.95 US a month. And on there, you can go in and it prompts you to put all the information you need. It gives you advice. It basically takes you through the whole process, and at the end of it all, it will generate the business plan, which you can download, put it into PowerPoint or put it into a Word file or whatever you need to do with it. So that's not a lot of money. That's what, a couple of Starbucks a month or something. So it's liveplan.com. So it's the best one I've seen. There's a lot of software you can download as well that are hundreds of dollars, but this one being cloud-based, you can work on it anywhere. And you can cancel it anytime. You don't have to stick with it, but that's the best one I've seen so far in that area. So different proposals. So some of the if you're doing a funding proposal, which of course you would be. Now, a lot of these organizations have all their own forms and their own outlines, I guess you could call it, but some of the things that are important is to deliver an important idea and make sure that it addresses an issue. So where's the need, and show that you've taken a different approach to that issue. In other words, you're not the same as everybody else. You're doing something a little bit different. Describe reasonable objectives and a detailed plan to achieve them. So that's a lot of work. And sometimes there's something to be said for unreasonable objectives. Now, if you're talking to your bank, you don't want to share that with them, but sometimes a lot of the ideas and a lot of the things that have been successful to some people might be unreasonable, but to you it's something that you can accomplish. And then make sure that whatever it is you're doing, your project, your band, your record company, your association, is capable of success. That's what you're trying to convince them of, because the grants, they want to fund things that are successful, that are going to help the industry and help the individuals, and certainly if it's a loan or an investor, they want to get some money out of it somewhere. So you've got to convince them that down the road somewhere, and it might take some time, and a lot of things do take time, but you've got to, and a lot of this is your personal branding, I guess you could call it. You have to be a salesperson to a certain extent, and you have to, especially if you're doing it in person, you have to dress the part. If you're going to go in and see your banker, don't go in ratty old jeans and a t-shirt. You have to. You don't necessarily have to wear a suit and tie, but because even bankers don't wear that much anymore. But you have to look like you're already successful to a certain extent. If you're doing it online, obviously they're not going to see you. But the way and if you're not good at with the English language, find somebody who is. There's lots of people around that can edit all your work, edit your crowdfunding proposal, and make sure that it's good English grammar and spelling and all of that type of thing. And even if with a Factorie grant, you want to make sure that it's all worded really well. And there also are people out there that will do grants for you. If you Google that, I know a number of people that will do Factorie grants. They'll want to get paid for that, of course, but some of them have done it before and been successful. So it's a good shortcut, and it might just mean that you're going to be more successful.
And there we go. I guess that's carried us through here. Yeah, I've got more questions. Jim, was there anything you wanted to tack on, I guess, just to wrap us up?
Well, I think the main thing, with anything in life, you've got to really believe in what you're doing, and it has to be contagious. And then the other thing is just persistence. It has to be ridiculous persistence, because a lot of this is difficult, and dealing with the government for sure is difficult. But that's what it's all about, is persistence. Never say die, basically, it has to be your motto. And you just don't give up. You just keep going, and you build. If it's a music project, you build fans one at a time, and wherever you go, wherever you play, there could be somebody in the audience that's going to help you along, and you have to be doing that all the time. Is be a missionary for whatever your project is.
Yeah, we've made great time, so keep the questions coming in. We've got a good chunk to go through some. In the meantime, if I can tack on a couple of things, just some advice that pertains to some people's questions here. The criteria, the eligibility for, I guess, speaking to these funding bodies, music industry associations, the factors, and etc. Read their eligibility criteria and submission instructions very, very carefully. These organizations do a great job of being very thorough and posting exactly what they're looking for, what they focus on, how their decisions are made. Make sure that you've got a very, very good grasp on that, and hit every point that they ask for. Avoid what they don't. Related to that too is that some of the groups that we've spoken about, for example, the Canada Council for the Arts, what they're looking to fund, as Jim mentioned, he said more serious projects. They're very much focused on innovative art and adding to the Canadian canon. So if you're applying for a grant based on a 20-minute dulcimer opus that you want to write, that's where you're going to send it. And your application is going to focus primarily on the artistic integrity and importance of that work, whereas organizations like Factor or your provincial music industry association, Manitoba Music, etc., are more concerned with your business acumen. And even though these are grants that in a lot of cases they're not expecting to be repaid, they are still looking for a potential return on investment. If we're going to give you $3,000 of what's essentially taxpayer money, how are you going to turn that into export development? How are you going to turn that into units sold? How are you going to basically turn that into you becoming a taxpayer and keeping the whole thing going? So yeah, just some words to the wise that you really want to have a handle on what you're applying for and cater your application to that opportunity, to that funding body. You'll get the same advice from any of the executive directors of those associations that you approach. So let's get to some questions here. Jim, someone's wondering if there's folks out there you can hire to write grants or mentorship programs, any resources beyond what we've done here that can help people write a very good grant application.
As I mentioned, there are people that do that for a living, and if you Google them, the other option too is if you know an artist, like let's say Factor as an example, if you know an artist that's been successful and you talk to them. You can find out how they did it, or if they used somebody who does grant writing. But I know I've run into several people that do Factor grants specifically, and they've had a track record, and they know how to do it. And you're obviously going to have to pay them something, but they're more likely to be successful maybe than you are, and they're less likely to go crazy with all the red tape, I guess you could call it. Another thing important with Factor, because I've been on the juries a number of times, if you're submitting tracks to Factor, make sure they're strong right off the top, because the people on a Factor jury a lot of times have a lot of tracks to go through, and they're not particularly patient. So if you've got a song that just kind of rambles on for a while, and they don't even, and you're hoping they're going to get to the chorus, they won't. They just kill it and they're on to the next one. So you want it arranged in such a way that it's strong right off the top, and so that that'll keep them going. Because I've heard stuff it's either so boring, or in some cases it barely even resembles a song. I was a judge one time at a Pepsi contest, and it was to do a commercial, and we had 1,000 entries. I think we listened to those for 2 days, and in the end we all decided there weren't any. There wasn't even one out of that they was suitable, and so at 3 in the morning we had to call the lawyer to say, do we have to pick one? And the lawyer, of course, said, yes, we do. And it was just amazing, some of the stuff that was submitted. It barely even resembled music, some of it. So make sure you've got something that's really strong.
Well, right on. Yeah, I've had a question here, and if you don't mind, I'll jump on it just because I sat on the board for Music PEI for a few years as someone asking about, or just talking about the frustration that comes with having an application rejected over and over. I mean, Factor is a very big organization, but still, they've got a big staff, many who are dedicated to outreach and education. If you are a member of your provincial music industry association, which you definitely should be for funding and a lot of other resources and opportunities, they are always welcoming of people to walk into the office, and you can even reference a specific application. Like, this is what I put in. Why wasn't I successful? And in a lot of cases, the jury process is discreet, but they often invite the jurors to make notes to help the applicant. They can walk you through and ultimately help you produce a stronger application for the next round of funding. Again, just making sure that if you know how these are going to be adjudicated, how they're going to be assessed, you know exactly what you need to highlight, what you need to focus on, what you need to try and convince people of. Yeah, so we'll jump on here. Keep the questions coming. There's some great ones here. We want to help you out. Huge opportunity to have Jim here. Jim, are government funding bodies like the Canada Music Fund and Canada Council for the Arts going to be influenced by the increase in pledged government funding immediately, or do you have any idea as to how the pledged investments in those are going to be rolled out? Is it over the course of a few years?
Yeah, it's most of what I saw was over the next 5 years, and it was a certain commitment per year in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's going to have a pretty big effect. And they also put a lot of money into the CBC, which has a huge trickle-down effect for indie artists. Just because, a lot of music, the prime place to get it heard is on CBC. So the Trudeau government more or less rescued the CBC because our friend Mr. Harper was kind of just picking away at it and taking the money away. So it's going to be over time, but it is overall billions of dollars that are going to trickle down through all of those organizations, really.
Mm-hmm. A great one here, and I'll let you take it first, but I may be able to add. When submitting a track to Factor, she mentioned Factor specifically, do they prefer to hear something like a more stripped down demo version to recognize some potential, or are they looking for a more produced finished product?
It just depends, but I mean, I think the better it is, the better chance you're going to have for sure. The more you can show them what you can do, the better, because it just affects anybody. I mean, if it's a songwriting thing for SOCAN, then it's a whole different thing, or for a publishing company. But if it's something where you're trying to get money to go in the studio and record, I think the better it is, the better. And if it's a full track, they won't necessarily listen to the whole track, but if it's compelling enough, they will. If it's really strong, you know, I've seen lots of cases where they'll listen to a 3 or 4 minute song, but I've seen other cases where after 10 seconds, everybody just looks at each other and that's the end of it, because it's just either weak or just bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jim nailed it. In pretty much 95% of the cases, you're going to want to put your best foot forward. The only experience I have with that working against someone, and again, goes back to making sure you know thoroughly what you're applying for. But with Music PEI, we had what was called a targeted demo program, where it was $1,000 grant, the lowest tier available. And the whole idea was to take very green artists and to essentially give them $1,000 to help put together an EPK, record a few demo songs. So in that case, if you're submitting an album quality track, you run the risk of the jurors looking at each other and saying, well, this kind of sounds like it's already there. But that's a fairly specific example. So outside of that, yeah, I think best foot forward, the better it sounds, the more impact, the more potential you've got to take that somewhere. And you're welcome. Keep the questions coming. Jim, I've got one for you. One of the first panels I ever sat on, it was Halifax Pop Explosion. One of my fellow panelists made the point that, you know, there's a lot of different ways to get your project funded. Ultimately, his advice, though, was if you're putting in a factor grant where your whole project depends on you getting a certain amount of money, basically it was, if the project isn't going to succeed based on a yes or a no from a few $1,000 grant, that it may not even be something that's ready to be pushed forward. Is there some merit to that?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you know, in a better world, we shouldn't really need any funding, but it's not a better world. So I mean, if you can get more money, make your recording better. But I think that's true. You know, you should be able to do it from other sources as well, your own money. And I think, you know, another investor or anybody else is going to be more impressed if you've got some of your own in it. So if you don't, so if you've got the faith and you've put some of your own cash in, or a partner or whatever, I think anybody, whether it's a lender or a grant organization, is going to be more impressed with the commitment that's there.
To the question that preceded that one of our attendees has done some jurying for Factor and says that, yeah, he agrees that the more finished the track, the better idea the juror has about the potential success of the finished project, which is
right
on. Yeah, great point. Thank you for that. Yeah, let's keep rolling on here. Go through a couple. What about just for fun here? People always like either horror stories or exceptions, but yeah, we're talking about some of the rewards that folks have made available on crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter. You shared a few of the creative ones. What are some of the more creative, whether it was a reward on a crowdfunding site or maybe a more creative pitch that someone's put forward to one of the different funders that you listed? But does anything really stand out for you as being coming out of left field, but ultimately being very successful in getting someone some money?
Well, I mean, the one that I mentioned where the gentleman wanted to change his sex, basically the headline was, I need a vagina. That was the headline for his pitch. Now that, at the time I thought, oh my God, that's pretty bizarre, but it was very successful. I was amazed, and he wasn't really offering anything in return. I think seems to me he needed $10,000, and I think he got about 40. So that one was, you know, so I think a good headline is really important, something striking. So when somebody comes onto the page, it's going to catch somebody's attention, and then they're more, and maybe a good photo as well, something that's going to cause them to read it, and then they can get into the pitch. But it's like any kind of promotion, the headline and a great photo are two things that are really important anywhere.
Yeah, good point. What about, and this would pertain, like it would be different for different opportunities that you're applying for. But as far as support materials on an application, I've had a lot of people ask me as the editor of Canadian Musician if I would write, or share a short endorsement when they're applying for funding or in some cases visas. Is there a limit? Can you potentially overkill how much support documents you include on an application? Is it always a good idea to try and show all of the different people that are behind you?
Yeah, I think there it's a question of quality instead of quantity. I think you're better off with maybe 2 or 3 recommendations from really well-known people rather than, you know, 30 of them from your second cousin and your neighbor and just a whole bunch of people that don't mean anything. I think if you've got somebody very successful in the industry, like a record producer, let's say, I think that counts for way more than just a whole whack of them because people aren't going to read them all. But if you've got something from somebody really well known or an artist that's really well known, I think that means a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right on. Okay. Any more questions out there? We'll do kind of a last call here. Whether it pertains to something we've touched on or if you want to try us out of left field, take advantage of the opportunity. You've got decades worth of experience in the music industry here. That's Jim.
The one thing is one of the handouts is a PDF of this PowerPoint basically, and what you should do with that is download that, print it out, and that should really be your checklist. So keep that. It's an outline. It gives you all the different ideas. And you can go through the resources, but keep that as a reference, and that way you're not going to try and remember all of this. You've got an actual outline there that you could work to. Go through some of the fun, see the ones that are not relevant, just forget them. Don't try and pick 1 or 2 that are the most relevant to what you're looking for.
A great question here from our friend Dale. You mentioned earlier persistence is key. Definitely agrees. He's wondering, and this may change from case to case, but do jurors have a sense of a given applicant's submission history? And if so, would their submission history, successes or failures, have any impact on the success of a current application?
They're not, well, initially they're certainly not supposed to, and people that I know at Factorie, the ones I've been involved in, if any of the jurors knows the artist or is involved in any way, they kind of excuse themselves from the voting, and that way it works. But basically, they should be listening to music first and then getting into the background stuff if it's worth getting into. So there's the bio and the photos and all the other stuff that comes with it. But if they really hate the music or just feel that it's not worthwhile, the rest of that information kind of becomes irrelevant. Mm. So, and people just nowadays have no time. So you want to keep everything really concise and straight to the point, and really, it should make you emotionally excited, I think, the music in some way. And then, then at that point, it doesn't matter how many times they've applied. Because some people do apply a lot, but don't just keep applying with the same thing, because it's probably not going to work. You want to change something, your music or your approach, or do better photography, or whatever it is that's going to get people's attention.
Yeah. This one is back to the event for the Manitoba Music Educators. I'm blowing the official name, but the lady that had asked about the centennial coming up for the Provincial Music Teachers Association. And this would be a good one across the board. And I think she's very lucky to be asking you. Jim is something of a sponsorship guru. Tips for going about getting sponsors for that specific event, but maybe just in general, how to entice a potential sponsor to jump on board with your project or event.
Well, the main thing is you have to offer benefits for the sponsor, not just that you're a poor soul and you need money. It really has to be a benefit to them. And when we do sponsorship where we're looking for money, that's the main thing. There's a list of the benefits, and sometimes very small things like a logo on a website with a link to their website. Some people like that. all the promotional plans, posters, and social media, website, an app, let's say, like all of those areas where the person's logo and identification is going to be. Those are big benefits. Another one might be that one of the benefits might be for somebody from that organization or company to speak at the event, maybe to be involved in some way. For a lot of people, that's a big benefit. For an event, another way you can fund an event is have the registration open as far ahead as possible, so people can pre-register, put it on their credit card, put it on PayPal, give them an early bonus for early registration that it's $10 less or whatever, so that way you can be getting money 6 months or a year out, and that's another way of funding it as well. Because I see some events where the registration's only open a month or two ahead of time, and it really should be open as far ahead as possible.
Oh, right on. Well, we've got kind of a flood of new questions here, so I should say we'll close out the session in about 5 minutes, but we'll be able to get to some of these via text afterwards, so stay put. But here we go. Yeah, one of our attendees here, her daughter was invited to perform for the premiere of British Columbia. Since then, she and her sisters have put together a group and are working on their first album. Would that opportunity to perform for the premiere be a strong point for an application?
I don't think it hurts, but again, it doesn't necessarily demonstrate any profit potential, I guess you could call it. It's more of a promotional highlight more than anything else, and I guess it would depend on the process, how the artist was chosen. So that might be an endorsement in itself, but it's part of the promotion that's there. So it certainly doesn't hurt. It's a positive thing.
Another of our attendees, bankrupt, which we'll just say $0, and wondering about funding options. I've tried applying for many things, but bankruptcy is a barrier. Private funding, are there people who would be willing and ready to donate or invest? Any ideas for someone whose bank account is leveled?
Well, I think factor in that, I don't think is going to look at those types of things, and a lot of the grants certainly don't.
Right.
But in a lot of cases, it might be. It just depends how it's structured as well. If you're personally have gone through bankruptcy, you can certainly create a company, or if you're partners with somebody who has a limited company, then that takes it away from your bankrupt situation. But then you kind of have to start with grassroots. Then maybe if you're an artist, one thing we didn't mention here as a source of money is playing live. So if you're very successful playing live and you make a profit at it, you can take that money and invest it into recording and the other things you need to do. So that's another source of revenue, possibly things like merchandise, and if you're successful at that, those are a couple of ways to generate money. But even if you have no money and you're bankrupt, you might know somebody that has enough faith in you. I mean, a lot of people, including Mr. Trump, of course, but there's a lot of other people that have gone bankrupt in many cases, many times, and that doesn't mean you're going to continue to do that. You have to demonstrate that that's not going to happen again.
Let's see here. Yeah, someone's asking, I guess it's related to our topic, maybe strays a little bit, but being that you'd have experience here, the lady that had asked earlier about grants for transportation, so she runs or is involved with a company that does tour coaches for the entertainment industry. Any suggestions for competing in Canada when clients are always comparing Canadian rates to American rates? So for example, a lot of folks are used to paying a certain amount in US dollars per day for a vehicle and driver. How do you essentially be competitive when you're working with that exchange rate?
I think that it's a question of value. If you can offer some value that's maybe doesn't cost you a whole lot of money, service is a big one. Personal service, people will pay for that. The fact that you're in Canada and you're accessible and they can access your company a little bit better. The patriotic thing generally doesn't work that well, unfortunately. But I think there is just added value. People will pay a bit more. You know, in our book business, we compete with Amazon. And, you know, our pricing is about the same, but what we do offer is a lot better service. You can't call Jeff Bezos at Amazon and talk about your book order, but you can call Maureen at our company and talk about your book order there. So that's one way that we're able to compete and maybe just turn it around. So I think in that kind of business, which is a service business, there's probably benefits and extra add-on services that you could offer that maybe your American friends aren't.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, there's a couple questions here, but I'm comfortable. I'll shoot a text reply individually, just fairly specific. So that brings us to the end here. Show me the money. And hopefully we've opened up some avenues for how you can find funding for your next musical project, your company, your association, your organization. In front of you here, a few titles that some of our specialists have recommended that build on this topic and will branch out into others. So essentially reading to help you just take some of the ideas we've shared here and really flesh them out. That's musicbooksplus.com/show me. And again, there you'll be able to access some tips to make the most of your next webinar experience, which we hope you'll join us for. We'll be presenting another free webinar in December. NWCwebinars.com is the home base for that. We'll be announcing it in the next few days. And there you can also access this session as well as the previous ones that we brought you, everything from finding a manager to record deals to a home recording primer, and there's much more to come. And on that note, we're also going to be sharing a survey. Once the session wraps up, you'll get a link to just fill out a few questions, multiple choice, where we invite some ideas for future sessions, invite your feedback. Ultimately, we want to be catering to Canadian music industry, and well, you are that. So we really appreciate your feedback, your guidance, and appreciate you joining us this evening. Big thanks to Jim Norris for presenting Show Me the Money. Again, it was at IMSTA a couple of weeks ago. NWCwebinars.com. NOR.com is the homepage for Norris-Whitney Communications, of course, CanadianMusician.com. And with that, lots of thank yous, lots of kind notes here. Thanks, folks, for that. Thanks for playing ball. Some more answers to questions coming momentarily. And with that, we will sign off.